Welcome to the Assistant Room Podcast Season 2. We are the go-to online community for assistants around the world. And if you're looking for some serious career inspiration from some of the best and brightest executive assistants, you're in the right place. If we haven't met before, or if you're just joining us, I'm Jessica Gardner, founder of award-winning PAEA membership platform, The Assistant Room. Make sure you hit the follow button to keep up to date with all of our future episodes. But without further ado, welcome to Season 2 of the Assistant Room Podcast. In this episode, I chat to Simone White, Executive Business Support and founder and global chair of internal network Gain at an asset management business based in London. We have a brilliant conversation on the various roles she has held throughout her 20+ year career, including Director of Administration. We also talk about why assistants should be allocated their own department and the positive changes this major restructure could bring, her passion for DEI and how this has developed into a global network of internal assistants, and why exploring options for learning and development is not just the responsibility of corporate businesses, that it's the responsibility of every assistant to ensure a highly successful career for years to come. Welcome, Simone. Thank you for coming and joining us, Season 2 of the Assistant Room Podcast. Yeah. So nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Why don't we start from the beginning? So you've been in this industry now for over 2 decades, not too long at all. Tell us a little bit more about kind of where you started and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So thank you very much for having me. It's great to join you here. Wow. Yes. 2 decades and some. How did I start? Most probably the most unusual route. Actually, maybe not. But I studied fashion journalism and promotion, so nothing to do with my industry at all. Having done that for 5 years, graduated, realised actually I wanted a little bit more control over my life. And because I did journalism, I knew how to type, I knew how to handle very senior people. I worked London Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week, so you learn to deal with different personality types. And by the time I graduated, I needed cash fast. So I joined a recruitment agency, and that's how I came to be an assistant. So I've done everything from Director of Administration to Executive Assistant, and I enjoy my work, the variety of it, and all of the industries that I've been in. So I started at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London as a typist there, and now I work for an asset management firm. So I've done quite a few different industries.
So really varied then.
Very varied.
Lots
and
of
all
fun.
Very different. Oh yeah, definitely lots of fun. V&A was fantastic. It's so different to being in a corporate world. I've been in recruitment, I've done town planning. So I've worked my way across industries, but it's not really the industry I look for, it's the role. And I think that's the really good thing that you can have in your favour as an administrative professional. You look for the role and where you want to be, and it doesn't really matter which industry you're in, as long as you can bring those skills to the table.
And the people too.
Exactly, yeah.
Working for the right people,
for the right people,
time. And
yes. Sometimes you don't know the people before you go in, but you kind of have to get a feel for it on interview. And the longer that I've been in this industry is the more I realise that when I go in for an interview, it's actually a two-way street.
Absolutely.
It's not just me trying to give the best of me. They also have to see, I also need to see that they deserve me.
Yeah.
And that might sound big-headed, but you're going to be working for a long time. You need to enjoy where you're working.
Yeah, and what they can bring to the table too, and how they can support you in your career growth.
Definitely.
For sure. Okay, well, considering all of your experience so far, what would you say have been the biggest changes that you've seen, bearing in mind that you've worked across different kind of sectors, you know, for different companies in different industries? What are those changes?
I almost feel it's a bit of a circle. So if I think about how it is now for administrative professionals, it's almost starting to go back to how it used to be when I first came into the industry. So when I first came into the industry, there was it wasn't a formal hierarchy, but there was a way for you to progress. And that kind of diminished after 2008, when suddenly assistants took on more and more responsibilities, but they weren't given the gravitas of those responsibilities. They were kind of just given the tasks. And I feel now that our industry and our population are more vocal about the fact that, look, we're doing all of this extra work. We're doing all of these really high pressured jobs. We need to be valued more. So I feel that's coming back, but it did kind of disappear after 2008. We just took on a lot of responsibility, event planning, middle management, and yet we were still just the assistant. And I feel now that we're really beginning to push back against that, and it's slowly beginning to shift.
Do you think that's got something to do with the pandemic and how people felt a bit more powerful, you know, in that time when they were away from the office, and maybe they realised how much of their time was being dedicated to small little nuisance interruptions, and they were able to kind of focus more on their really core skills and become specialists almost in those additional things?
I think the pandemic has hastened it, but I actually think it started beforehand. And I simply think it's because that perception that people had from like the Mad Men era of what an assistant did, and the fact that we have a lot more males coming back into it. A lot of people think that the assistant job started with females. It didn't. And because females took up, still do, we're like 98% of the population globally, I think that has held us back. In the same way, I always think of it as different layers of intersectionality. If you think that women are always fighting still to this day to be recognised, how much more so for a population that is predominantly female? So I think pre-pandemic, it had already started to move, but obviously with the rest of the world readjusting because of the pandemic, why not for this population as well? So I think that there's been a bigger push since the pandemic, but I think it definitely started before that.
Do you think salaries are going to change now that there is that push as well? You know, are you, because I'm seeing it a lot in the people that I support and the clients that I support who are looking for new PAs or EAs. The expectation for salary now is a lot higher because there are those additional responsibilities. And I think it's amazing.
I think it's amazing, but you have to know why the salaries are changing. And the one thing I'm passionate about is if you look at the history of the administration, we tend to always be listed in management structures as entry level. So no matter how much responsibility you take on, if you're entry level, your salary is going to be capped. So until firms start to see us as more than entry level, we're not beginners in our role. Yes, some people are. But actually, if you have 10 years experience, good experience, so not just tenure, because I know we have assistants who just have tenure, but assistants who actually are keeping up with the ongoing changes of technology, development, taking on more responsibility rather than more tasks, then their management structures need to change around them. Otherwise, salaries won't really be benchmarked properly. It'll just be, oh, my assistant's good, so I'm giving her this great salary.
And that doesn't help anyone.
It doesn't help anybody, because then if that person tries to move on, they are then, but why is your salary so big? Because as far as we're concerned, you're still entry level. So I think more needs to shift, not just salary, the entire perception of what administration is, what we have to do, all of that needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the variety that you've had in different businesses before, you know, you've not just had that executive assistant role, but you've also been a director of administration. And I remember when we first started talking about this, and I'd never really heard of a director of administration. And obviously that was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years ago that we met and started talking about it. What was that role, and what was the benefit that you saw to the other assistants within the business when you were a director of administration to have somebody like yourself in that position?
Well, this was a much smaller firm. So this was when I was in a consultancy firm based in the city, and the office was 30 professionals. So the director of administration at that point, they were the senior support to the most senior person in the office, but they were also the office manager, and I had 3 other administrative supports reporting into me. So the receptionist and 2 other PAs. So my responsibility was all about the office and how the office systems worked, how it works for the professionals, what was provided for them, which included the administrative support that they had. And why that worked really well was that a lot of the consultants there, their specialisation wasn't administration. So when it came to reviews for assistants, they hadn't got a clue. They had never been one.
That's not surprising.
Exactly. Whereas because I had that seat at the table, I knew what was happening within the office. I knew what all the priorities were. I also knew how to effectively manage those 3 assistants. And they knew that I had been an assistant. I knew what administration was. So when we were having discussions, I wasn't asking anything unreasonable. Whereas I think at the moment, that role has kind of disappeared. And so I had that role pre-2008, right? So after 2008, all of those roles started to disappear. You're starting to see them again. So you'd see administrative supervisor roles, where you now have that layer in between the assistant and the executive. But sometimes where I'm seeing it, they're putting in people who don't understand administration, or they're actually offering it as a reward where an assistant can't be promoted. So as with all people managers, you need training in that role. It's completely different. You do need to understand that, yes, you might have a relationship, you're another assistant, but at the end of the day, if you need to give critical feedback, you need to know how to give that. And I think that's, again, it's the structure of administration. If you look at administration is so siloed in so many firms, it kind of sits beside the business. It's not fundamentally a part of it. And all of that impacts the assistants, the firms themselves, how the firms operate and run, and the service they get. So I think for me, being a director of administration, I was young at the time. I didn't really think about it. It was just the role I was given and I ran with it. But now looking back on it, I can see the importance and how effective and seamless it made the office.
Why do you think it is less common now? I know that obviously you said it's coming back and there are different variations on that role. And I've seen, especially some of the big companies, the big 4, for example, they've got directors of the administrative services or the secretarial services, as they call it. But do you think that it will probably need to come back, or that there is, because I think that there needs to be a structure for PAs and EAs internally that they trust. And I think in this industry, it's a kind of been there, done that, got the t-shirt, which will give you that trust and that credibility. But as you said, some people have never done that before. They don't have experiences as PAs or EAs. So how are they supposed to lead that group of people?
And this is the bit where I think it's because businesses don't really understand what we do. So you have the terminology just an assistant, that in some respects, an individual exec will say, I couldn't do without my assistant. But then when you ask them, so what training do you give them? What are their goals and objectives? Well, I don't really spend time on that. Then you couldn't really do without. There needs to be some kind of link. And I also think if you have that person there, or you have that foundation, the function of administration, it means that there are goals that are set for them. It also means there is a responsibility that they have. In large organisations where we have 500 assistants globally. If you have no set structure, no set competencies, no form of behaviour, the way that someone should be working, that's fundamentally going to affect the business. And you don't have that for any other group. So every other group has it. So why would you not think that this population who works so closely with executives, not even with just executives, every individual who comes through that door, they have an interaction and a relationship with that administrative professional. They set tone, culture, behaviours. But who's setting it for them?
It's weird, isn't it? Because there's no department
for
that group of people. And there are so many problems that come along with that, mainly to do with budgets, because every department has a budget. But as administrative professionals, they're sucked up into the individual or the departmental budgets. So if you're working in finance, you fall under the finance budget. If you work in HR, you fall under the HR budget. And that causes so many problems.
And it's just because they're not viewed as talent. And I think that's fundamentally where it comes from. if you think about any organisation, when they get new talent in, they grow that talent because they believe that that person could then be running the company or have a senior role in the company or have impact within the firm. If you are never viewed as talent, why would they spend the time?
I think it's heartbreaking because so much dedication is given by everybody who does this job.
Yes.
Because you have to be ready to put yourself second consistently. Not even second, third, fourth, fifth.
Yeah. And actually, I think maybe that's the problem. Because we're always putting ourselves last, we are rarely the ones who speak up about mistreatment. So it could be a female thing, and we hear a lot, if you have women's discussions, they talk about empowerment and how you must speak up for yourself and use your voice. And yet a lot of those discussions don't include administrative professionals. So why not? Because they're the ones who most probably need it the most, just because of how they're viewed. But I think it is about pushing back against the norm. So if you're not included, why are you not included? Why is there this filter of information that comes down to you when actually, if you knew that earlier, you could be so much more effective? And if it comes down to confidentiality, it can be in your contract about confidentiality. But I think there just seems to be this mind shift that's required to realise that, one, we are professionals, two, we are actually part of the business, and that we don't sit alongside it. Otherwise, we're just treated as resources.
There's so many things that could be changed when it comes to that mindset shift. I was having a conversation with a PA the other day, and she was saying her mum's just died. Her husband of 10 years left her 2 months before her mum died. And she's a PA to a really high-flying CEO. And she said, I'm the only person in the office who's expected to leave all of my personal drama at the front door, or all of the things that are going on in my life at the front door, and be expected to let that not affect me on a daily basis. And I was having a conversation with my colleague Amy the other day, and I think it is about overexposure to things within the organisation that we allow ourselves to experience. Almost, if you're working in finance, if something happens to you at home, you can just come in and hide behind a spreadsheet and do your numbers. If you're in marketing, you can focus on your social media campaign. If you're a PA or an EA or anyone in the admin industry,
your business is people.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to, it's difficult. Like, I can't imagine going through something like she did and having to consistently talk to people on a daily basis and expect to be, as you say, smiling. And so I think if we push back on a lot of things, many things could be changed also from the perspective of the execs that we work for. The importance of mental health, the importance of budgets, the importance of departmental ownership.
It definitely starts with us. We're the ones in the situation. And with anything, if you think of all the discussions around DEI at the moment, all of the discussions around change or what needs to change, those discussions are first held by the people who want the change. It's never somebody else turning around and saying, oh, look at that group. Why are they not included? It's never that way. It's the group who aren't included who have to speak up.
Yeah.
And then they have advocates, but they have to speak up first. And I think if we think about a lot of the people, not everyone, but if we think about the population of assistants who are majority women, it could be that some of them are the highest earners. It might be harder for them to say, do you know what, I'm putting my family first, I need to go. Now, that can happen for a woman in any industry, or it can happen to men too. But I think those systemic things, those ingrained things, stop us from talking about it. And the perception that other people have of us, that slowly begins to sink in, and we see ourselves as how they see us.
Yeah.
So we are just the assistant. We don't have a voice. Oh, it's a team meeting. Am I allowed to go? You're a part of the team.
Yeah.
Why are you not going?
Exactly.
Especially if your job is not... I do understand that there are some people who literally, the phone needs to be answered all the time. They work for senior people. A phone cannot go to voicemail. But if there's a group of you, there's no reason why you can't rotate. And if you are not in one of those roles where you don't have to be stuck to your machine, join the team meeting. People will never see you as anything but the assistant to, so they won't even know your name. unless you have a voice
participate.
and you participate.
Yeah.
It's not just about being in the room, because this table's in the room, but we're not talking to the table, right? You have to control your career. It is up to you, and people won't always be there to lift you up. You have to make that journey yourself sometimes, and put the effort into that.
Let's focus a bit more on DEI, because I know that that's going to be a big focus in general of our conversation, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. You're probably the most passionate person that I know who is actively promoting DE&I in lots of different ways and encouraging people to kind of step into that position of leading the way on DEI. So where did your passion for DE&I start?
It's really weird. I think it's because of the work that I've been doing in my firm. And I never really thought of it in DEI terms, to be honest with you. I just realised that as a group of assistants, we were treated differently.
And it's diversity, equality and inclusion, isn't it, DEI? Yeah.
So it depends. Some people say diversity, equity and inclusion. Some people use equality. I tend to use equity.
Okay.
And the reason why I use equity is because equality means giving everybody exactly the same opportunity. But it doesn't take into consideration where that person is starting from. So often you might see the image of a race, and all of the racers line up and the starting pistol goes and people run off. And then you'll see that somebody has a ball and chain on their leg, so they can't run as fast. Or somebody is partially sighted, so they can't run. Now, they've all been given the same equal opportunity, but actually, because of how they started, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And that's why I like equity, and I like
equity.
to use
I like
it.
that a bit more.
Yeah.
There we go.
Everybody's different. Equity is taking into consideration someone's starting point and the help that they need. Because then that person, it's almost like giving them a larger box to stand on so they can see the same thing. And I think it's so important for assistants, because look at all of the baggage that we are carrying. We are not viewed the same. We are not viewed as professionals. So even if training is open up to us, or you're opened up to come into the team meeting, if you sit there and someone's asking the opinions of everyone in the room and then you are skipped over, that's not equitable. They could turn around and say, oh, but you were in the room, why didn't you speak up? If you've never been in the room and never had the opportunity to put your hand up, how much better is it if someone says, Jess, I noticed that you haven't said anything. Do you have something to contribute? That's equity.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important. And I think because of everything that I've tried to do in the assistant space, because of the focus after George Floyd and Amy Cooper with Black Lives Matter, and it really became in people's consciousness, I thought I can use that when I'm talking about administration.
Yeah.
Because then it's not just about it's not fair. It's not fair doesn't change anything. You need the data, the stats, the reasons why it's important to have diverse thought. If your assistant's thought is never in any process, you don't get their perspective. If they're not included in anything, how do you expect them to stay motivated? If they're not promoted, how do they stay motivated?
Does this come back to, you think, as well, the ability that assistants have to set their own objectives according to what they know they need to get their job done? Because surely if you go into a meeting with your boss and you say, okay, one of my objectives is to become, a very active participant of this part of the business, or I want to learn more about this area, or I want to learn more about that. Is that maybe a way that we can start kind of not forcing executives, but making them aware, hey, hang on a second, I'm putting my hand up here. This is what I need from you to be able to make my job easier and to do it better.
It's definitely a way to hold them to account and to yourself as well. So I know that if I want training, you always have to remember why though, because a business is not going to actively support you unless it's going to benefit them, hands down. They're just not going to. So what is it that training or you attending the meeting, how is that going to benefit the individual? Because if it's only benefiting you, I'm sorry, they're not going to do it. But I think by having the objectives where it shows how you're benefiting them, it also holds them to the account, because objectives is something normally you should do together. So even if you write them, they need to be agreed and signed off. And I find if I know I want to do certain trainings and I've indicated why I want to do them, if it's signed off and then halfway through the year I've always had to push it back, I can say I'm not meeting these objectives because you're not giving me the time to. So I think it's a really good way. Often assistants look at objectives as a chore, or how is it really going to benefit me? Is my pay going to get any bigger? Am I going to get a title change? Actually use your objectives to help you get where you want to be in reason. Don't be asking for things that are just way outside of your core responsibilities, because you still have to do them. But it also gives the opportunity for that particular executive to realize that you are managing your career. If you're always copying and pasting from the previous year, then why should they bother with it? Because you're obviously not bothered.
I hear so many PAs and EAs as well say, one of my objectives this year is to give my exec more work-life balance, or to get them to this many more exec meetings, or to get this many more new clients on board for them. They're not objectives that are going to benefit you.
No. And I think you kind of have to separate it. What I tend to do with my objectives is there are always objectives based around my executive team. So whether that is to make things more seamless for them, to provide them with more opportunities, I often will speak to them and say, what are the things that you're working on? Because once I know that what they're working on, I don't make that my objective, but I think about it and think, okay, how can I help that process? And that goes in as an objective. But I also do objectives for me, so my learning, my growth. And I talk about the fact if I want to grow or if I feel I've reached a limit, because my executive is there to treat me as talent. And if you want them to do that, you have to speak about your career. Now, I had some really good executives who made me think about it. It wasn't from the firm, because actually in the firm, they didn't view us as talent. So it was individual executives who I worked with who would say, Sim, have you thought about what you want to do? Have you thought how else you can grow this? Because at some point you're going to reach a ceiling. How are you going to keep going through that? But I think it's really important that we think about our roles. We're going to be working for a long time. Think about what you want to do, and don't rely on the fact that, okay, I'm going to work with this executive and they're going to be with the firm for this long and I'll just keep going with them, because people move companies much more regularly. It's highly unlikely that you go with your executive now. So are you literally going to start your career every time you're supporting someone new and having to build up a reputation? Build up a reputation that is distinct from your executive, so people know who you are, what you bring to the table, because that will serve you in good stead if your executive leaves, if you want to move around an organisation, when you move on. It's so important to own your brand and know what your brand is.
I love that. Let's switch it over a little bit to where you currently are at, and the incredible network, Gain. Tell us a bit more about Gain.
So Gain, my baby. Well, no, I need to stop thinking of it as a child because it will grow. So Gain is the Administrative Professionals Network at Blackrock. Gain stands for Global Administrative Initiative Network. Very long, but our firm has a tendency of having acronyms that mean something. So our women's network is called WIN. So you win, right? It's important. So when we were really going global, it was, what acronym can we have that means something? And we came up with GAIN. I came up with GAIN because if you have an engaged, motivated, administrative professional workforce, it's not just the assistants that gain. We all gain. And that's the strapline. So I started the network in 2013, I think, and that was just EMEA. And I basically started it because there were so many inconsistencies about how assistants were treated. Some had the opportunity to be promoted, others didn't. There wasn't any. Some were trained, others weren't. And we spoke. I was on the women's network at the time, and I knew how that worked. And it was highlighted by a couple of people to HR and talent that, look, there's so many things that we just don't have and every other employee does. And they turned around and said, well, why don't you start a network and change it? And I just thought, a lot of the things we want to change, it's not in our power to change, even as a network. But you know what? I saw what Win had done. So I started a network in EMEA. That grew. It's 120 assistants we had responsibility at that time. And then there were issues that came up globally. And so in 2016, 17, 18, we went global. So the network supports 500 assistants globally. I'm the global chair, but I have co-chairs, regional chairs in Asia, in the US, and in EMEA as well. And because we went global, we have senior leader sponsorship. So I'm very privileged in that our senior leader sponsor is actually our vice chairman of the company, so Robert Fairburn, fantastic advocate for us. I don't reach out to him often, but when I do reach out to him, he will always take action. And anytime he's in London, he always has an audience with the assistants. But what it has given us is a collective voice. So rather than one assistant saying, look, this is happening to me, we now have the ability to speak as 500 individuals. And it also has given us an operational structure. So a lot of the time as assistants, things will change via stakeholders, whether that's systems that we use or technology that we use. And any training would go out to the company all at once. But what would happen is all of the employees would turn around and ask their assistant, okay, we've got all of this, how does it work? We wouldn't know because we're getting the training exactly the same time as you. So what we have done is built up relationships with a lot of stakeholders. So now we now get things as end users, but we get it first. So we can test it. So we can ask all the questions that nobody else would think to ask around delegate access, for instance. We use things often as delegates. Nobody else uses it as delegates. So things would roll out and all of our delegate access wouldn't be there because we weren't asked as end users. So all of that has changed for us. But it's also given us the opportunity to create career paths. So it's been approved. We're just waiting for the final HR sign-off. But there are lots of things we've been able to change to make sure that we're visible, to put systems into place so that trainings that are offered to 2 of our levels, so analysts and associates, are also open to assistants. So we call it the 3A's model. So any training open to analyst or associate is open to assistants. It's making sure that we're included into the business rather than sitting alongside.
I think it's so inspirational. I think so many people struggle with the idea that they cannot create an internal PA network.
Yeah, it's hard work.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard work. And I think not so much from, unless you're changing something quite significant, then the pushback from the firm can be quite hard to get through. But if you're doing positive changes, the firm is all for it. But actually, the biggest pushback sometimes comes from the assistants themselves because we don't want change. We've always done it this way. Why do we have to do this? Why? And I think that lack of ownership over what we've had, at the end of the day, we're a collective. And so much more can be done if we work together than if we isolate each other. But again, I think that goes back to if the only way you could be recognized was to find the 3, 4, 5 people in the company who are growing, all you would do is hoard information so that you looked good. Because you knew that was the only way you could be recognized, by being the best. Whereas if you have career paths that no matter where you sit, as long as you have the behaviors and the skill sets, you can be recognized for that, people are much more likely to work collectively. So there's a lot of, you really have to look into why assistants work the way they are, what baggage they're carrying to really change the perception. But I think once you have that, then they start to appreciate it and then they support it. But getting that at the beginning is really hard because a lot of people think, but what are you doing it for?
Do you think that's the biggest issue the industry as a whole faces, that issue of perception? Or do you think there are other things that maybe contribute towards that, or other things that are equally as challenging?
I think it is perception, but it's also the structures that exist, the systems that exist. As I said,
or the lack of systems. Yeah.
But if you think about every organisation, no matter how small to large ones, they all have some sort of management structure, right? So, and management structure isn't your corporate title, it's how they view you. So I always say to people, have a look on LinkedIn or on Indeed, look at assistant roles, no matter the title that they have, and look at the management structure. If it says entry level, that's the problem. Because entry level basically means you're just starting out. Look up what entry level means when you're going into an organisation. It means somebody who has very little skill, has very little work experience, and is looking to be trained. If you are a highly proactive strategic assistant and you take up an entry level role, it doesn't really matter how your individual executive views you. In that company, you are still entry level.
Because you work with your executive, but you don't work for your executive, you work for your company.
Exactly. And that's the other thing that assistants really need to get over.
I've been saying this for so long.
It's if you're a personal assistant, and personal assistant in the way that I'm using it is somebody who works in an individual household, for instance, or for an individual person and is paid by that person, that's different because you are interacting with them and they have that hold over you. But if you're working for an organisation, on that payslip that you get, it has the organisation's name. It doesn't say your individual executive.
If your individual executive paid you, there was out of their own pocket, there wouldn't be out of hours calls. There wouldn't be nonsense tasks that they give to you.
Exactly. And I think you also have to be able to stand your ground in certain things. And it can be quite hard. It's not easy. But I think if you don't learn that technique to stand your ground in small things, and it's not to say that, okay, no, that's not my job, when it's like to do some filing or stuff like that. I'm not talking about things like that. But it's really important that you learn to stand your ground. I do it for things like my executive, I know what his schedule is because I plan it. I will always plan that he has time for lunch. If he doesn't have time for lunch, I will turn to him and say, do you need me to get your lunch? It's not expected that I go out every day and get his lunch, get his coffee, because I have an entire team to support and that is not my job. I'm not here to get your lunch. It's not to say that I wouldn't get it, but you have to understand the concept. I'm not here to get your laundry. I'm not here to do your personal shopping. If you ask my advice for something, I will give it. But the firm pay me to manage your time, to manage your team. If you don't learn those things early on, you will find that you get very frustrated simply because you're asked to do these tasks consistently. And there is nothing wrong by saying, look, I really don't mind doing these for you, but these are the things that I have to do. And I'm allocating you time before lunch, and the firm is not really paying me to go out and get your lunch. Because what will happen is, if something happens, and we've seen this in the courts where assistants have been told by an executive, shred all of this material, and they go and shred it, and they didn't check, it could be confidential material, it could be a lot, and they aren't asking those questions, then they're up in court being told, but you're an executive assistant, it's not your responsibility to do everything that your boss says. So our responsibility is to know what our firms want of us. What's our responsibility? And our firms pay us. But it takes you, to have that understanding, you have to realise that this is your career and you need to understand what your role is. If you don't have that understanding, then you just go into work every day and you say, what do you need me to do?
And you're very task orientated.
Exactly.
Just do constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of changing the subject a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think when we had our briefing call on this particular topic we're going to talk about now, which is learning and development, I think you were the first person that I ever had, because I've been thinking about this for a while. You were the first person, though, that I'd ever said that I see the lack of learning and development provided to PAs and EAs by their organisation regardless of whether or not it's not just the organisation's responsibility to provide you those opportunities, it's your responsibility as well to go out and seek those opportunities. But I think it's starting to become discriminatory. I think it is, and that's the word I think I was really worried to use for a really long time, discrimination, because everybody else in the company, even entry-level individuals who are entry-level and who aren't confused about that, they are still given an L&D budget.
Yes.
There is an L&D budget that exists in every company. It might not be huge, but it exists. And administrative professionals are the only people, or anybody who works in a support role, are the only people who get said, no, we don't have budget, or that's not relevant, or you're my PA, why do you want to go and do that?
And discrimination is the right word. Some people don't like it. You could use the word bias as well. And again, it comes down to look at the systems that we work within. If you're always viewed as entry level, why do you need training? Because we don't expect you to be beyond entry level. So, and that's why I say it's really important to look at the systems and the structures that we work within. Because if you're always going to be deemed as junior, entry level, why do we need to give you budget?
It's bizarre to me. It's just, it drives me mad. Whenever I can't remember who it was when we were doing a previous podcast recording the other day. And someone I can't remember which guest it was, but we were talking about how there was a company that we'd approached to say, we've got this membership platform. It's got 50 grand's worth of learning and development on it. Literally press the button. It's ready to go. Like, we can take that off of your hands. And it's not expensive. So budget to me was not an issue, but they came back and said, this isn't a priority for us at the moment.
But this is my point.
I was so shocked and disappointed. That made my heart break.
It's a whole mindset shift that's needed. And the one thing that I'm very conscious of is those in our profession who want to learn, they will pay for it and they will grow. But we'll also have those who will say that they want training, then when it's provided, don't show up.
Oh my God,
which makes it worse, right?
100%. And that is so common.
Yes, it's very common.
So common.
And yet these things, and I think that's why I say it's not just a mindset shift for the industry, it's a mindset shift for us. So not everybody will do that. And in the same way, if we look at other professionals, well, they'll have training and they don't take it, but it's not the majority. Whereas for us, it is the majority. And I don't know if it's because we've always felt that we've been pressed down on, why should we bother? Or it's a case of, I know often when I talk about upskilling or continuing to reinvent yourself or taking on more responsibility, people don't hear responsibility, they hear tasks. They hate taking on more and more tasks. Now, to be honest with you, I do less task management now than I did before I started the network, but my responsibility has grown tremendously. So the weight of responsibility that I have now, I am more accountable. There are some who work like us who don't like the accountability.
And that's fine. Some people are like that,
but then you can't complain. And that's what I find. It's there seems to be this disconnect between, look, you are not going to be promoted just because of tenure. Look at all of the people around you. They are promoted not because they've taken on more and more tasks, but they have more and more responsibility. Yeah. So if you want promotions, or if you have to take on responsibility, it's not about taking on tasks. But I think, yes, organisations tend to, their focus is administration simply because we're not viewed as talent. So until we're viewed as talent, they won't spend money properly on their administrative staff. And that's a system we can talk about, but it's not actually in our power to change. But we do have to highlight the fact that because you are not viewing us as talent, you are losing so many individuals or you're just hiring in the wrong people, which is negatively impacting you.
100%. When I think back to the kind of conversations that I had with executives when we were building the membership, the thing that they seemed to be, and you know, it could have changed by now, but we went through 18 months worth of roundtable discussions to build this platform with everybody who had some kind of involvement with an administrative professional, whether that was an exec, a HR director, a PA, EA, junior receptionist, whoever they were. And we highlighted the kind of areas that we wanted to build, which was obviously the learning and development area, the events, all of the typical things that you would expect. Yeah. The thing that they all loved the most from an exec perspective was the area where they knew as a business they would be able to make a cost saving through the relationships that we'd made with brands like Joe Malone, with Biscuiteers, with the fact that we had relationships with hotels and
Nothing
restaurants
where
they would get, you know, a free glass of champagne on arrival. And it was so interesting. And they said, if we can somehow justify the cost of this because we will earn it back, that's when we will sign it off.
But it's so short-sighted because a good assistant will save you that money all the time.
Exactly.
All the time. I think I'm sure there was a post on LinkedIn this morning where an executive highlighted their assistant saying that they were such a great asset to them because they were a startup. They wanted flowers in their office and it was going to be something like £2,000. And their assistant negotiated with the wholesaler direct and got it for $350. Right? Now, that executive is going to keep putting time into that EA simply because they know the value add. And a lot of the time, I think actually these executives need to understand the value of their own time, because the better assistant you have, the more time they can give you to focus on things that you should be focusing on. Why does it matter that you get a glass of free champagne or a gift for Joe? That's got nothing to do.
It's just ridiculous.
It's not a concierge service. You have not got a concierge sitting there. They're there to help you, proactively support you in your business. And that's the shift they haven't got.
Yeah.
Once they've had a really good assistant, it shifts for them.
Absolutely. And I think this is why so many people condemn assistants as just an assistant. Yes. Whenever anyone says that to me, I say, okay, focus on the fact that if anyone ever says that to you, it's because they're not important enough to have an assistant, because they don't understand the impact.
Or they've never had a good one.
Exactly.
And if you think about it now, because I know when I first started, there were much more one-on-one roles or one-on-two roles. Now, the average person doesn't get their own assistant until they reach the director or even MD level. And even at MD level, they don't have their own. So if you think about the fact that they're not really getting that dedicated support, as in somebody to bounce their ideas off, someone who can say, okay, this is happening to the team. You need to focus your mind on this. This is the synergy between this meeting and this meeting.
A confidant.
Exactly, because you are that neutral position. As an assistant, my team's 54 at the moment, right? I don't support them all the same. I'm a touch point to most of them. I have 2 MDs and a director, and even them I support differently because of their workloads. But my team will know that there are lots of things that I know of a confidential nature that they will never hear from me. But they also know they will come to me if they want something that my boss to hear, but they won't go to him directly. Because I will broach it and say, do you know what? There's a lot going on in this team. You need to focus some time here. Because I'm doing it not to gain favour, but that's my job. I'm there to make sure that the team, the synergy within the team is correct. But if you've never had someone like that, it's kind of, a lot of people are now saying, oh, I need a chief of staff, because they want that additional support, because they think an assistant is just there to manage calendar, not even time. I don't manage my boss's calendar. The calendar can manage itself. Planners go in, planners come out. I manage his time. And there is a big difference that if you don't articulate yourself the right way, if you don't use the right terminology, if you don't have an understanding of the business, it doesn't have to be a great understanding, as in I'm in portfolio engineering, I know how to manage a fund. I don't. but I do know what's important to that team. Everybody should have that as an assistant if that's the kind of role and relationships they want to go in, because then you're going to build those relationships. People will trust you for you, not just because you're the assistant too. And that's so important.
Talking about articulation, on the other side, for people looking in to what we do, we again have chatted before about the representation from a language perspective that we have a responsibility to uphold when it comes to describing who we are and what we do. And I still see it on LinkedIn. People just, and on CVs actually, miracle worker, magic wand waver, superwoman. I mean, my first boss when I was a PA, he used to say to me, your job is to make the impossible possible. And I said, it's a nice, cute phrase, but it doesn't describe the fact that I can organise, an offsite for 500 people in Singapore in 2 weeks. It doesn't accurately describe how I'm managing multi-million-pound contracts with Vogue when I'm 23 years old. So what's your I suppose, opinion on language and representation, on how we move forward as an industry? Because I think it's not just about representing who we are as individuals, but it's about doing everybody else a favour and representing ourselves professionally.
I think language is so important, from an individual and how they articulate themselves, even how you respond to something. So when somebody says, you've done a really good job, or they say, I don't know how you do it, don't respond, oh, it was nothing. Because if you do, then people will believe it was nothing. If you keep saying to somebody, it was nothing, it was easy, why are they going to believe there's a skill involved? So just true. That little
and we've
thing.
all done that.
And we've all done it.
Yeah.
And I do believe it's innate in us as females. So a lot of the terminology that we use, it's because that's just how we are as females. But I have trained myself now to respond with thank you. Or I do this with my team a lot. So they will say, Sim, I never quite understand how you manage to do all of this. I'm like, that's why you do what you do and I do what I do. And this is my specialization. Because if you want people to believe it's a skill, you yourself have to act like it's a skill. Even if it's easy for you over time, but it's a skill. We all know when somebody can't manage a calendar or manage time correctly or read time zones correctly or put someone in the wrong airport. We all know that, but this is a skill. Then when you're talking about it from an industry level, it so needs to change. We're not seen as professionals, even though, yes, there is a day called Administrative Professionals Day. It's Administrative Professionals Day is only great if you're seen as a professional. I would rather not have a box of chocolates or flowers or an expensive handbag. I'd rather have some L&D. I'd rather have you have a conversation about my development, actually, rather than just one day you give me a really nice present and then the rest of the time you're not thinking of me at all. And we have to start thinking of that. If we think about engineers have a skill set from the very junior one who's leaving all the way to the senior one. Think of nurses, doctors, every single industry that is a profession. They talk about it in a certain way. So why are we miracle workers? Why do we have capes? I don't have a cape. I'm not the only mother who has 2 children who runs a network. There are men who do it, women who do it. Why is it so special? It is special. I'm not saying it's not special, but it's a skill. It's not some innate thing that I dropped off of a planet somewhere and I suddenly wear a cape. It's taken time, and you have to talk about it that way. I know that I would not be having this conversation with you 10 years ago and articulating myself the way I do now. It's because of time, what I'm trying to do for our profession, how I've had to research it, look into it, understand where it came from. All of that I'm doing alongside my day job. So this is a skill. This isn't something that I can just do. I'm not unique. You can all do it. Just put the effort in and then articulate that, because that's what everybody else has to do. So to change the perception of our profession, we need to walk the walk, talk the talk, and act like professionals. and stop having capes, stop doing events where it's all about having a drink and getting your nails done. Which other professions say, come along, have an event, and all you're doing is getting your nails done? Come on, yes, that's lovely. But actually, you're just feeding into that perception that we are not a profession. We are a profession. And if you want to be seen as a profession, we have to elevate our game. We have to. And it needs to start with us.
Thank you. Well, let's finish on a question that we like to finish with everybody, which is, if you could look back at everything you've experienced in your career so far, if you were to meet Sim on day one of her career, what would you tell her?
Not to accept other people's limitations.
Ooh, I like that one.
I think for me, this comes from various different intersectionalities, right? So I always think I have quite a few layers. So I'm female, I'm a Black female, and I'm an assistant. So that in itself comes with navigating the world differently. So sometimes it's a case of, is someone treating me differently because I'm a woman, or because I'm Black, or because I'm an assistant? And I literally have to go through that. But what I'm trying to do now is, I don't really care if those things are going through your head. How do I view myself? So I think it's really important it's not about arrogance, but you need to have a certain level of confidence in you and be able to back that up with skills. So it's not all about talk, but you have to be able to have that confidence in you and realize, do you know what? I do have a certain amount of control. I can control how I react to a situation. I can control if I stay in a situation where it's bad for me, thinking that nobody else will accept me, because that's rubbish. But you spend so much time sometimes dealing with what everybody else puts on you, that you forget that as an individual in your own right, you are powerful and you can navigate. So I think that would be it. It's to not let other people set limitations for me, or if they do, rise above them.
Thank you, Sim.
Thank you, Jess. That was great.
That was fun. Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram to keep up to date with all of our future episodes. And if you're looking for a place to focus on your personal and professional development, we have a place in the Assistant Room membership with your name on it. Head to our website for more information on how to sign up and become part of our award-winning online global community for assistants everywhere.